Hello everybody, and welcome to our first session of the two-part conference for Thriving Life and Helping Service Children Thrive, and it's going to be delivered by the Skip Alliance, so we're very, very lucky to have the Skip Alliance here today. My name is Charlotte and I work for Study Hire, which is a Uni Connect programme. This session is part of an ongoing Teacher CPD webinar series, which is in collaboration with Aspire Hire, which is another Uni Connect. I'm just admitting some more people. And today, Skip Alliance will be delivering the session, and they'll also be delivering the session on the 23rd, so we look forward to seeing you then too. So before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to make you aware that this session is being recorded. So the recording will be available on both the Aspire Hire website and the Study Hire website and the Skip Alliance website after the session, and we'll send it out to all the delegates as well. So if there's anyone that missed it, any of your colleagues, then please do feel free to send that on to them. That would be great. I'd also like to point out that you should have received a Delegates Booklet via email from me earlier today. Please do keep this handy because we'll be referring to it throughout the session. I'll also post a link to that just after I finish speaking in the chat, so you don't have to go through your emails and find it, so don't worry about that. Please also do keep your mics muted while the panelists are speaking in order to avoid any background noise. If you did have any questions throughout the session, please do post them into the chat box, or we will be going on to a live Q&A session at the end of the session, so then please do feel free to unmute your microphone and ask them verbally. That's also perfectly fine. We'll also be posting an evaluation form at the end of the session, so please do complete this if you can't come to the next session. If you can come to the next session, then please do complete this after you've attended both sessions. It would be really, really appreciated if you could, and we really appreciate your feedback, so thank you in advance for that. So now, finally, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. We are very lucky to be joined by the Skip Alliance, and today we're joined by Kath, Kim and Phil. And first of all, we're going to hear from Kim James. So, Kim, thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And I'd like to say a very warm welcome this afternoon to all of you from sunny Oxfordshire. I know we're joined by a range of colleagues from across Oxfordshire, but also we have colleagues here this afternoon from Northamptonshire, South Yorkshire, Hertfordshire, West Berkshire, and I believe somebody from Fife. So very warm welcome to all of you, wherever you may be, whether it's in the UK or further abroad. Welcome this afternoon. So as I said, my name is Kim James and I'm Head of Service for School Improvement in Oxfordshire. I'm actually here today as the chair of the newly formed Oxfordshire and Central Service Pupils Progression Alliance Hub. And if you look on page 37, you'll see a map of the UK and you'll see all the hubs that are plotted. So when we started in November as our hub, there were only 7 hubs at that point. Today I'm pleased to say there are 10 across the UK. So this is a really great piece of work for all service children as we go forward over the coming years. So Oxfordshire, just to give you a little bit of context, we have of 151 local authorities, we are 5th. We have the 5th highest population of service pupils across the UK. We are what we call a tri-service local authority, so we have representation from the Navy, the Army and the RAF. 22% of serving RAF personnel are actually based in Oxfordshire. So those of you who are from Oxfordshire will be more familiar with that information. But in addition, we also host in Oxfordshire the Defence Academy, which is down at Shrivenham. So that's to the southwest of Oxfordshire. And thus the families we have across Oxfordshire come from all around the world and form part of our wider service community. So we have over 3,000 students, 3,055 I think at the last count, students who qualify for the Service Pupil Premium. Obviously that's a voluntary thing, so there may well be significantly more students across Oxfordshire. So we've formed in November and we've working alongside the Oxford University and also Aim Higher, and we are meeting on a regular basis to really strengthen the work that's been going on in Oxfordshire for some time. So lots of work has been going on, but this is our first CPD event today. It's one of 2, and we are here today to look at the Thriving Lives Toolkit. And this is a tool that has been developed to help all of us evaluate the work that we are doing, to reflect on the good work that's going on in very many of our schools and wider settings, and then to think about what additional practice could actually be happening, provision could be actually happening in our schools. So I hope that you'll find this interesting this afternoon. If you want to know more about the work of the Oxfordshire and Central Service Children's Progression Hub, bit of a mouthful, there is a website and you'll be directed to that a little bit later. So I hope you'll find this afternoon interesting, and we will all be here at the end of the afternoon to ask any questions. So without further ado, I'd like to hand on now to Phil Dent, who is going to give you some wider information about service pupils. So Phil, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kim, especially for acting as the host with partners at Oxford University and the UniConnect partners for the hub. So it's really great to see that flourishing. As has been said, my job here is just to try and help give you a sense of what the Skip Alliance is about, but also I want to try and send you away with an easy way to think about and to understand the diversity and challenges and strengths that service children might accrue from their very different lives. But I want to start by getting some interaction going, and that is via the service called Menti. If you've got another device, it's easiest. So, you know, a phone or an iPad, but if not, you can open up another window on a computer if you're using that. If you go to menti.com, it says at the top of this slide, it'll ask you simply to put in the code 40850109. And that will show you this question, and you can then make your responses. We're going to be using Menti just a few times in this session, perhaps in the next session as well. So getting familiar with that will be useful. It's very straightforward, but I'm going to give you an opportunity just to have a look at that now. So go to menti.com and put in the code. And I'd like just to hear from you what words sum up what you're hoping for from today. I'm going to give you just a few seconds to do that.
Phil, could you possibly repeat the code, please? Because it's disappeared on the top of the screen, I'm afraid.
Happy to, yeah. And perhaps we'll put it in the chat as well. It's 40850109. So I'll just give you a moment to do that. I'll tell you what my answer will be, because I'm not going to be filling that in. I'm really hoping for a few things. One thing I'm looking forward to is inspiration, because that's what I get a lot of when I get the opportunity, which isn't very common, to hear from schools, people who have service children, service families in their communities, who are working with them and are supporting them on a daily basis. The work we do at the Alliance is one step removed from children themselves. Our job is to help those who help service children. And so it's really lovely to be able to talk to those who are doing that work. Kath very kindly shared what you're inputting, and it's really helpful for us to know what it is you're hoping for. And I can also just check that we're actually going to do a good job of delivering it. Interesting to see that a lot of people are looking for information, and I hope that what you're going to find is, over the course of the 2 sessions, if you're able to do both, and I'd encourage you to do that, you'll get a really good mix of those things. So there'll be plenty of information today about service children, and that will be no news to some people and big news to others. There'll also be information today about the Service Children's Progression Alliance and the big picture of support for service children. And then in the second session, much more practically focused, particularly, there'll be lots of information about who you can work with to help you do what it is you want to do to support service children. The other main thing I suppose we'll be doing over both sessions is, as Kim said, setting out what the Thriving Lives Toolkit is and does and how it goes about it. So thank you very much for contributing to that. We'll use Menti again today, so keep that open. Thank you, Kath, for moving the slides on. Let me tell you a little bit about the Service Children's Progression Alliance, or the SKIP Alliance for short, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about about service children's lives through our simple summary, which is what we call the 4 Ds of service children's lives. But as it says here, the SKIP Alliance exists for a single vision, which is thriving lives for service children. We have a pretty broad definition of service children. We're not as narrowly focused as the Department for Education are, but they're motivated a little by how much money they can afford to spend on service pupil premium, I suppose. For us, a service child is anyone whose parents served in the armed forces at any point in the first 25 years of their life. And the reason for that broad definition is that the research itself doesn't tell us that we should be any more focused than that. There's a need for a lot more research, and I'm going to tell you a bit about our contribution to that. But broadly speaking, the way we go about that and what we find most useful is what we do to support practice, research and policy and the collaboration between those. I'm going to take you through a few steps in our theory of change, which, if you're not familiar with theory of change, is simply a description of why we exist and what we do. So this is, in short, the why and the what of the Skip Alliance. Like I said, some of this will be a message that's new to you. Some of this might be old hat. So one way for us to find that out, though, is for you to use the chat. I hope you can find that on the screen. On my screen, it's a little button at the top, and it opens up a separate window. Perhaps you just take the opportunity, would you, briefly now, just to put in the chat your setting. Are you in a primary school or a secondary school, or are you from a university or from the local authority? And where it's relevant, so if you're from a school, or if you know for your region, if you're acting in a regional role, how many service children do you have? So in your school, how many is it, or what proportion is it? If you're in a local authority, no, we've heard from Kim that it's just over 3,000 in Oxfordshire. Perhaps you're from another local authority and you can tell us how many you have there. If you're a university, then you may know how many undergraduates you have, but it's unlikely that you do. So if you can do that, that will really help everyone to get a sense of the diversity of the people that we have in the room today. I can see some of you responding already, and I'm really pleased to see the first response is somebody who's saying they have only 3, and then immediately we've got people who have as many as 2/3. Not surprising to see that a secondary, Andrea Bailey, thank you, has a high proportion of service children, given that there are obviously many fewer secondary schools than there are primary schools, and the proportions in secondary schools across the country are much higher in general. Approximately 3/4 of secondary schools have service children. So let me just tell you a little bit about the need in general. We characterize this through the 4 Ds of service children's lives. And while it's not a battle between me and Kath, if you're going to remember one thing, remember what Kath says later about the Thriving Lives Toolkit. But if you can remember 2 things, let it be one thing that Kath tells you about the Thriving Lives Toolkit and this. There are 4 Ds, a simple way of thinking about, and if your job is to champion service children to other people in your school or your region or your organization, a simple way of presenting to people how to go about understanding service children's lives. And the first D is diversity. The second is discontinuity. The third is development. And the fourth is disadvantage. Every child is unique, and that's no different for service children. But the diversity of service children's lives includes an extra layer of complexity that issues from the fact that their parents serve or have served in the armed forces. So all of the normal things pertain to any child, to service children, but there are extra challenges and opportunities that are layered on top of that due to the 3 things mentioned here. That is separation of all sorts of different kinds, mobility, which is the military word for that, and to us that probably is transition between schools, and then the military word transition, which for us is just leaving the military. So a bit of confusion over the language there, but those 3 things are the main things that the research tell us have an impact on service children's lives and are the reason they have such diverse experiences. And I want to just say one main thing about this, which is that those various experiences, which differ from service to service. Separation, for example, can be training, it can be on active deployment, that may be in a conflict zone, it may not. It may be through what is called weekending, for example, in naval settings, where parents are living at home in most weeks and then away, during the week, but home in the weekend. Or it could be for long periods, 9 months. Some of that separation might be for a submariner with very little or no contact with between the serving parent and the child for as many as 6 or 9 months. Separation can be hugely different. Mobility could be as much as, well, who knows? There are some competitions out there. We've spoken to young people who've had 20 moves in their school career. But it wouldn't be unusual in some settings for children to have, say, 8 different schools in their school career. It's also not uncommon for children to have no more mobility than any other child. So there's a huge amount of change there. You're more likely, if you're in the army, to move regularly and more frequently, but as a unit. If you're in the RAF or the Navy, then you're more likely to move just as a family, not as a unit, and perhaps less frequently. And transition, of course, is something which every serving member has to go through at some point, but the vast majority do when they are much younger and more likely to have children. So it's, in fact, 50% of the armed forces footprint as a whole are essentially squaddies in the army. And those are then people whose average career might well be as little as 3 or 5 years. So there's a huge amount of diversity, as I said, but the important thing to remember is that these 3 things and the way they manifest themselves in different individual lives is much more like a smoothie than it is a fruit salad. So when you're thinking about young people, there's no simple way just to pick out that is that impact. Oh, I can see the impact of separation there. We know what separation does. We know what mobility does. If we add those 2 things together, we can do this and that solves it. I'm afraid that's not possible. In a fruit salad, you can avoid the pear if you want to and eat all the pineapples. That is absolutely fine. It's not possible to approach service children, nor indeed any young person in that way. It's much more like a smoothie where you get an overall flavor, but you can't pick out the individual parts, okay? So that's why one of our core messages is in supporting young people, service children especially, then getting as close to the individual, hearing and understanding their individual experiences is the best thing we can do. And that's something that you as professionals are doing on a daily basis. The second of the 4 Ds is discontinuity. Essentially, that just means that all of that separation, mobility, and transition and their complex interaction leads to discontinuity. There's no value judgment on that, but it leads to discontinuity. There are breakups in the learning process. You might be learning different curriculums in different schools. You might move from one school to another school in an exam year and not be taught the language that you were learning in the previous school. You might well miss entire chunks of a literacy or a numeracy curriculum or do the Vikings 5 times. All of those things are common experiences for young people. And if you've spoken to mobile pupils, you'll have spoken to some who tell you those things. And you can guess some of the impact that that can have. There's huge impact on relationships, and that is both the peer relationships, but also professionals as well. Many children talk of the losing the impetus to want to engage in school community fully, having had so many experiences of having to break friendships and make new ones. And so it's really important that we work hard to build continuity, but also resilience for relationships and relationship changes. But it's also important for professionals who have to learn about young people again, learning styles and preferences. And also, especially, for example, in areas like special educational needs, where not having an education and healthcare plan or not having a special educational need identified very early enough means that mobility can lead to having to start that process all over again. You're much less likely to have your special educational need identified if you're a service child and very mobile than you are if you're not. And of course, there is discontinuity in opportunities. You might not think about it, but it's difficult to progress to becoming the captain of the football team or your musical instrument to develop greatly, or other arts engagements you are engaged in if you're moving between different settings. And for example, if you want to join the Cubs or the Scouts and there's a 6-month waiting list, you're going to struggle every time you move school or location. So there are huge things like that that you might not have thought of that have an impact on discontinuity. At this point, it's really important to recognize those are just some facts of service children's lives. The next 2 Ds are about the different ways in which service children respond. And it's also important to say this is very individual. It is not this child A does this and B does that. It's not that A does this time and then does that next time. This is different, like it is for all of us, based on our own personalities, the circumstances, but on different times we can benefit from a situation one time and the next time we're not feeling in the same place and we don't benefit. So it really is, I'm afraid, not an on or off, but there are huge opportunities for development and the flow from the discontinuity that service children experience, as you may know. Often we find, speaking to undergraduates, they're the ones best prepared to thrive in higher education, having had all of those experiences. But that is, of course, those who are able to get there. And the evidence tells us that they are less likely to access higher education for a range of reasons. But they do and can develop greater adaptability, independence, maturity as a result of that discontinuity in their lives and the way they respond. That's great news. We don't take a deficit approach. We don't problematize young people. We're not here to solve their problems. We are really here to champion service children, to help them make the most of their strengths. And it's our duty as professionals and corporate parents in some cases to mitigate the impacts that the system that we put them through might have on them. But finally, there is a significant risk of disadvantage, and it's evidenced, like I said, in being less likely to go on higher education, attaining far less well, especially if you move schools a lot, and having a range of impacts on mental health and well-being, and perhaps that pertain to from hidden caring responsibilities, which again is something that you're much more likely to have if you're a service child. But the major conclusion is that service children have huge potential, and we're here to identify that and make the best of it. That characterizes, I think, hopefully for you, in simple terms, one thing I'd love you to remember, which is the 4 Ds of service children's lives: their diversity, the discontinuity that flows from that, which can lead to the opportunity for development, as well as the risk of disadvantage. I'm going to rush through a few more slides, just tell you a little bit about us, but take away just that one thing if you're going to take away one thing from me. So how do we do something about all of that? Obviously, it says that something needs to be done. Well, we get the range of stakeholders who have a contribution to make towards thriving lives for service children together. We are focused ultimately on developing practice that's going to make the difference. We're not interested in research for its own sake. We're interested in research that can help us to understand service children's lives, as well as understand what makes the difference in terms of the action we're taking. And we also impact on policy. So for example, there's a few examples on the left-hand side here, including the research briefings that we identify, which have an influence on policy, and it's our research work that changed, for example, the Office for Students view and mean that service children are now a target group for Office for Students. And that means you should, if you approach any university saying, hey, you do this work with us, what can you do for service children? You should be able to get a good response from a university. And if you don't, by all means challenge them. What are you doing for service children? Because the Office for Students says they're a target group. So please do that. Hope that'll be a welcome thing for our university partners here. People are going to be ringing you saying, come on, help us with our service children. We're thankful to Study Higher and Aspire Higher and other UniConnect partnerships for what they do in supporting that work. But ultimately, what we've recognized we do that's most valuable is helping all of those stakeholders to get together and to work collaboratively, especially between the education sector and the military sector. And there's a large one, including over 1,000 military charities. We do loads of different things. Like I said, the research briefings, there's a mapping tool online which you can make use of. But one of the most significant things we've done is what we're talking about today, and Kath will tell you about later, which is the toolkit. We measure ourselves by our outcomes, and those are listed here, the kinds of things I've described to you already, like policy impact that we have with the OFS, but also in terms of the activities that happen, the impact that we get on young people. Creative Forces Days are something that are going to be operating in your area, I know, and that is a tailored university experience for service children, giving them an opportunity to have their voices heard, but also to engage with other service children. Something that's been most impactful for me looking at those days when I've been involved with them is seeing the one service child from a school meeting with the one service child from another school and no longer feeling like they're on their own. You may not know that 1/3 of those schools that have service children only have 1 or 2. So for the vast majority of schools that have or the largest single number of population of schools that have any service children, they have very, very few. 9 out of 10 schools that have service children have 12 or fewer. And that's a pattern that you'll see across most of the country. So it's really important that you have those opportunities like that. But also we work with people like UCAS, who've developed now with us some tailored guidance for applicants applying to university, but also are working on a marker so that allow service children to identify as service children when they submit applications for higher education. So that's our theory of change. It's the what and the why of the Skip Alliance. It's on our website, so download it if you want to make use of it and show to other people to help them understand. But like I said, if you do one thing, remember those 4 Ds, and that the best thing we can do is get as close as possible to the individual. A good example of how we go about that is a program of works we delivered previously, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But before that, the hub network essentially is the heart of what we do. You've heard that there's a hub in Oxfordshire and Central England, which we're thankful to partners like Kim and Charlotte and others for hosting. You can see there are, in fact, now 12, Kim, very recently, an East Anglia hub added. So we're really thankful to Kath, who oversees that. Thank you very much, Kath, for making that work and thrive and flourish so much. But the hub network essentially is there to help you help service children. Hubs individually in their local areas help partners do together what they can't do alone. So if it doesn't add value to your work, then don't go along, but tell us. It should add value to your work to be able to talk to other people who have a common goal as you, and may well be able to solve the challenges you have or help you to have a bigger impact by working together. And the Hub network as a whole, which operates through a Hub Leads group, which also has representation on our board, identifies and solves challenges that individual hubs can't solve on their own. So that adds value as an overall UK Hub network. I said I'd give you one example of one way that we go about making a difference ourselves, and this is it. We ran the Year of the Service Child Voice over 2019-2020 year, and the result of it was a report which you can find on our website. I won't say much about it, you can go and have a look, but it tells you the value of listening to service children and concludes with 4 principles, which are a good example of a takeaway. So our job is gathering together that practice from across the Alliance, identifying some simple messages that can be translated to anyone who wants to listen that will help you make a difference in practical ways. And this is one way of doing that. There's very good reasons captured there for why you should listen. But if you're thinking about how to go about listening better, and that is one of the 7 principles you'll find in the toolkit, then you go about that by being deliberate about your listening, being open to what children themselves want to say, letting them set the agenda, being child-centered is a way of doing that, being ready to be surprised by what they'll tell you, but also starting with the expectation that you're going to change something as a result. So I commend that report to you and suggest you take a look. I want to close by asking you to get involved again in 2 ways. One is just in a little kind of group response, and then secondly on your own with a little reflection. But first of all, have a think about your own work with service children. Like I said, we're big fans of Service Children's Voice, and we're going to be initiating a project to follow on from the Year of the Service Child Voice shortly, which will work on how we go about listening more effectively, but also supporting others to do the same. So just share in the chat if you've got more detail, but if you've got a few notes you can make on Menti, that would be really great. So go back to menti.com. The code again is 40850109, and you can there let us know, what do you do to amplify service children's voices? Are there activities that you undertake? Do you have some approaches or some principles you work by? Are there policies in place? Are there particular places where you make sure representation exists? What is it that you do to amplify service children's voices? I think I know who's responding with research, and that's a really good example of the ways that we can do that. It's really great to see there's a lot more research going on that is actually talking to young people themselves. Some years ago, before we did the Year of the Service Child Voice, and one of the reasons for prompting that work is that we saw lots of work which claimed to represent service children's voices, but it wasn't actually asking service children, it was asking others who might mediate for them. So it's great to hear. Good to see that lots of things that we recognise, actually one-to-one support, buddy clubs are really common and a really good way of helping service children not only to transition well, but also to thrive once they're at school. Interesting to hear about that project. I'd love to know more about the Oracy project you're talking about there. And working in partnership is a really good way, and the Creative Forces Days are a good example of how we've done that, because it provides a mechanism, as I've said, where service children can meet one another and have their own voices heard by others. But the other thing about Creative Forces Day is that we enable young people to speak back to their schools about the things that they find would help them. I'm going to close by just asking you to have a look at page 33 on your booklet, which is, I think, where you will find personal reflection time. And the reason for that is that we know these things are hugely pressured. Conference is a tool. We've become much more efficient, haven't we, doing these things online? But it's really important that you get an opportunity to think now about, you've heard a few things, 4Ds, the Skip Alliance, some things that we get up to, opportunities to do with the Hub network. That reflection there provides you an opportunity just to take stock for 1 minute and think about, is there a question that it's raised for you, an idea that you've had, an action you think you might take? One thing I do in all these, and I've been training and doing these kinds of things for some years, one thing I found really useful is just to challenge yourself with the question, what one thing could I do first thing tomorrow in fewer than 5 minutes? And that way you'll find that you go away from a conference or training thing with a real actionable way forward. You'll know, I'm going to do something, and it's something that's achievable because it's going to take me fewer than 5 minutes. So you might want to take notes in your workbook on that. and then you'll get the opportunity to do the same after you've heard from Kath in a moment. So I'm going to give 1 minute. Kath will interrupt you in a few seconds and take you on to the next session. But thanks for listening to me, and do get involved. Thanks a lot, Kath.
Okay, I have no idea whether that's exactly a minute, I'm afraid, Phil, but hopefully you've had a chance to do a few notes. And as Phil said, we'll come back to that later. If you'd like to share those thoughts in the chat, it will be interesting for us to hear it as well, or just keep it to yourselves. That's great too. As Phil said, what we're going to do now is look in a bit of detail about the Thriving Lives Toolkit. I'd like to explain the background to the toolkit that we're going to look at, and then we'll go through the detail of one of the principles and think together about applying those principles in school. We'll have an opportunity to look at the toolkit itself in detail. You'll find it in your delegate booklet as well, and I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it. I'll go through the background to it first. The Skip Alliance has a large network, as Phil said. We've got lots of schools, lots of people working to support schools like local authorities. Kim has been fantastic here, sharing information in the chat and things, and leading in the central England area. So with that network, we collectively realised that while there's quite a lot of informative resources out there, there's lots of research going on, actually support needs to be accessible to a big diversity of school contexts, as Phil said, and as we could see from all the responses in the chat earlier. So we saw that what we'd like was to develop a framework that would support any school to reflect and develop their practice, and that would then be a helpful addition to the community's work on top of all the resources that are out there. As Phil explained, everything we do is evidence-based. So we wanted the framework to be based on rigorous research. We secured some funding from 6 university partnerships, and that enabled us to work with ICEGS, which is the International Centre for Guidance Studies, a research centre with a lot of expertise in education and development research based at the University of Derby. And their research project comprised of an extensive literature review and then a survey of schools educating the service children across the country. And then they looked in detail at a few schools, picked really carefully to reflect those different contexts. We were really careful to include a balance of primary and secondary schools, different numbers of service children. As we saw in those little chat comments earlier, we wanted to reflect that difference from really low, just a few service children, to very high proportions, and also the different armed forces branches. And the researchers went into those schools and spoke to leadership, to staff, and to the children and young people themselves. And then they also had some external specialists. The research itself was led by a highly experienced senior team of researchers. They've got expertise in research, policy and practice, and the interplay between those, and complex evaluations. But then they also went to external specialists that they work with. For example, to actually develop the framework that we'll look at later, they worked with somebody who's developed a lot of quality and standards in the education sector. So this expert team developed a framework using a grounded theory approach based on that research. They looked at the review of previous literature. They looked at service children's challenges and the potential approaches to support that have been highlighted by teaching staff and by leaders in the survey. And in the school case studies when they actually went in and spoke to people in schools. And then they also looked at the issues, the challenges, and the potential approaches to support that have been highlighted by children and young people during the research. Once they'd got a draft framework, they then had feedback back from some schools, from Skip Alliance stakeholders during user testing. and the resulting framework was also reviewed by focus groups and by stakeholders, key relevant positions in policy organisations like the MOD, Department for Education, Office for Students. And Ofsted also, you can see at the bottom there, Ofsted said that they felt it chimes well with their 2019 education inspection framework. So once we had that, we then did a comprehensive pilot across England. And you can see from this little map where we we went to 12 schools, again with that really careful mix of different areas of the country, different branches of the armed forces, and the different range of service children within the school. And in addition to talking about the framework and the questions themselves that they helped us to tweak a little bit, the pilot schools were really, really helpful in making sure that this toolkit was going to be usable. They advised on the layout, how we put the questions through, and suggested what else we needed to support it. So they said there needed to be more information, more signposting to help them to act once they'd done that reflection in the framework. And we took that last point and we developed a suite of training modules, which you can find on our website, and I'll tell you about in a little bit more detail later. So to sum up where this toolkit came from, it was that diversity and distribution of service children in schools across the UK that Phil talked about earlier, that led us to develop this approach of a framework posing questions for consideration rather than putting together a list of actions to take ourselves. So reflecting on the questions with the support of that training suite and the Skip Alliance community that we've spoken about already today, that will help you to develop your own practice in your own unique context. So here are the 7 principles of effective support. This is page 10 in your delegate booklet, page 5 of the toolkit itself, but you've got this in your delegate booklet. So we took the framework in the research report and we turned it into this toolkit with the help of all our pilot schools and our community. The toolkit uses the researchers' 7 principles that you can see here with their vision statements to lay out what effective support may look like. As I go through these, it'd be really interesting to know in the chat which of these stand out to you, which do you feel confident in, less confident in? So the 7 principles, it starts with our approach is clear. Leaders' understanding and approach ensures resources and policies improve service children's outcomes. Principle 2, well-being is supported. Tailored provision, pastoral provision supports service children's mental health and well-being. Principle 3, achievement is maximised. Teaching, assessment, support ensure continuity of learning and progression. Principle 4, transition is effective. Systems and support ensure seamless transitions as children arrive and leave their schools. Principle 5, children are heard. We've touched on all of these already this morning, I think. Service children's diverse voices are heard and inform the support that they receive. Principle 6, parents are engaged. Strong homeschool partnerships, helping families feel part of the school community. And Principle 7, staff are well informed. Supportive training and networks ensure staff understand and support each unique service child. It's really important not to view these as a hierarchy. They are numbered 1 to 7, but Principle 1 might be the starting point, but Principle 7, for example, having well-informed staff, is critical to achieving those other principles. They're all key pieces of the overall jigsaw of what highly effective schools do to support the education and welfare of service children through their educational journeys. Okay, so let's delve into the detail of the toolkit. As I said, this has had masses of testing and poring over detail by the researchers, but also by lots of user testers in our network. So you can have confidence that the actions that you take, funding you commit, has that strong evidence base. This is page 11 of your delegate booklet, shows page 6 of the toolkit. Each principle has a page like this, which sets out the evidence, some examples of what that might look like in schools, and how the self-assessment is structured. So what you have in front of you here is principle 1, the blue principle. Evidence suggests the importance of strong, embedded policies, a planned and transparent approach to support and to funding, and careful monitoring. Effective schools have clear strategies for securing, deploying, evaluating dedicated funding. They involve the whole school and strategic roles such as governing bodies, and they ensure service children's voices not only permeate but strongly inform strategy. On the bottom right there, you can see an explanation of the self-reflection structure. On the following page, the user will be asked to rate themselves as either emerging, reflecting and implementing actions, developing, making strides in addressing the question but yet to embed it in regular practice, or embedding, a programme of established, monitored, evaluated work showing evidence of impact. So here's the next page of this principle, and this is the same for each of the 7 principles. It provides reflection questions which you can use to review your practice under this principle. Let's look at how it's put together. Each principle has 5 or 6 questions to it. And then you're prompted to consider your current practice, to read the question and think about what evidence do we have in our school. You might want to start off by looking at those middle 3 columns and reflecting on the extent to which you feel your school is emerging, developing, embedding, and recording the evidence for that judgment. The Alliance's pilot, as I said, of this framework included lots of partners across the UK, and the questions were designed in such a way as that they should work for different settings, different schools, different areas. The questions for Principle 1, our approach is clear, as you can see here, prompt schools to reflect around whole school awareness, monitoring, evaluation, embedding the voices of children and families, governing bodies, policies such as admissions. The toolkit goes on to present similar evidence and opportunities for reflection for each of the other 6 principles. The toolkit is guided by fundamental principles that you can see here. Partnership, as Phil said, is fundamental to the Alliance's existence, but it's also a commitment to a way of working, and the toolkit has been developed not only with schools and young people, but a huge variety of dedicated people with a lot of experience in supporting service children, several of whom I can see in the audience today actually. And it's not a fixed endpoint, we're continuing to develop it together. It's asset-based. As Phil said, we don't want to problematise the young people. It doesn't mean avoiding problems or ignoring issues, but it challenges us to focus on solutions. Like all children, service children have huge potential, and their experiences can provide wonderful opportunities to thrive, as Phil said earlier. And again, it's evidence-led. We can never know everything we need to know, but combined with well-informed professional judgment and an unrelenting focus on the child, a sound evidence base can help provide that foundation for service children to thrive. So I'm just going to give you another little bit of time, having run through that, and thank you for putting your thoughts in the chat. I'm going to pause for a minute and read your thoughts while you have another little chance to reflect. I'd also be grateful if you could pop onto Menti again and let us know who you're going to share this with after today. That might be somebody, that might be different people back in school, it might be colleagues in other organisations. SLT, governors, everybody. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, we can see colleagues has come out strongest. Also different roles within the schools, and I think we've got quite a few people here who represent organisations that work with schools, so that's fantastic. I'd just like to quickly introduce you to the resources that I mentioned earlier. As I said, we piloted just the framework and people said they needed somewhere else to go. So we've worked right across our networks, and also we went back to the people who said they needed this, and we worked with schools as to what kind of format they like. And we ended up with this 3-tier level of resources in a training suite. So we have some animations that just give a short introduction to that principle, the key things, what is this, why does it matter, how you should respond. Then tier 2, we've got some detailed narrated PowerPoints that were put together with lots of partners across the UK, going into a lot of detail about the evidence, the context, policy information, and also experience and examples of what this looks like in schools. And then we've also got some other signposting, some case studies of schools across the country, which again, just give you somewhere else to look for ideas and different things. So I would like to set you some homework before we see you again on the 23rd of June. Please do go on our website and have a look at these resources. You might want to go and look at all of them, which would be fantastic, or pick one of the principles. You probably don't need to watch the animations because Phil's probably done a good job of some of that, but some of them do have more in them. But the narrated PowerPoints will allow you to really delve into detail that we won't be able to do in these sessions. So please do try and find a chance to do that and come to the session on the 23rd with your thoughts, your reflections. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to connecting with you in the Q&A that I think we've got 10 minutes left to do now.
Brilliant, thanks so much everybody. Yeah, so like I said at the beginning, please do feel free to unmute at this point to ask any questions or just pop them in the chat, and then Kath, Kim and Phil will be able to answer them for you.
I have a question. It's Hazel.
Hi, Hazel.
Hi there. How do you work effectively with schools that maybe have one service child? Do they find it more difficult to use Toolkit when they're thinking very much about their one child?
I think the beauty of this toolkit is that it does work for both settings, and actually I think something that was very interesting in the piloting was that schools with a couple of children, it would be very helpful but might not be useful if you were on a base and had loads of service children, but several schools that had a lot of service children said, how on earth would you do anything if you only had a few service children? So the toolkit does allow you to kind of approach both situations, and it was tested with schools that just had a couple of service children. I think the key is helping that school to connect with other people, and you do have good networks here in Oxfordshire particularly, and I'm sure there will be in the other areas that we're represented here today. Creative forces that Phil mentioned earlier, for example, brings schools together, and as Phil said, it's the schools there, but just have a couple of service children or even one have really benefited. So I think reaching out to other schools is key.
It's Kim here, just to come in as well. I think the toolkit is quite a good talking point to sit down with your governor. So many people have a service pupil governor, If you've only got one service pupil, you may not have a service pupil governor, but actually it's worth talking to one governor and going through the self-evaluation tool, and really helps you stop and think about, you know, what do we have, what provision do we have in place, what do we need to do more of, what do we need to do less of. So you know, it's a different conversation when you've got 95% of your children in service, but actually, as Phil said earlier, I think it was 9 out of 10 schools with a service child have 12 or fewer, so it is a challenge in very many schools. But you know, doing the work collaboratively, we've got a head teacher group running, and maybe it's something for them for a future agenda, where to work as a group on the evaluation tool, and it's a really good discussion piece as well. Thank you, Kath.
Can I just ask, interesting for me, I'm a disadvantaged lead for the school as well, and obviously I use the Education Endowment Toolkit lots. But it's hearing what others spend the grant on would be really useful. I was a couple of minutes late on, so I don't know if you've already mentioned that, so apologies if you have. I was changing venue and Wi-Fi and all sorts. So I didn't get on at dead on time. But yeah, you know, spending, the impact of the spend and most useful ways people find to use the grant would be really good.
If you look at that toolkit on our website, we've got quite a lot of case studies of schools. Some of them were using service pupil premium, and some of those are applying for external funding, such as the Education Support Fund. And actually, I'll put in the chat as well. Actually, I think that Millie from Wales is here, and she has a fantastic toolkit about applying for external funding, actually. It's not examples, but it's fantastic guidance on the different funding available. A little bit of it's Wales, but it has things like the Education Support Fund and things. So again, that's quite helpful.
And it's Kim here again. £310 is not a huge amount for service pupil premium, but actually we know that people use it in like an elastic and using it all sorts of ways. Obviously, it's about mitigating about the impact of deployment, and it's quite clear about what it should and shouldn't be used for. But people are very creative, and certainly one of the things that we're doing is gathering case studies together so that we can have that local information and share with this wider group. So happy to provide some further information later on, but I know there's lots of good case studies out there already.
I think one thing, going back to the point earlier about schools with not very many service children, some schools very successfully band together in an area. So if you haven't got enough service children to have a service children's club, for example, people might use the service pupil premium to set one up at one location and provide transport or provide things such that you can get children to that club from various different schools.
And we're aware in the Abingdon partnership, which is sort of in the centre of Oxfordshire, for those of you who don't know the geography, they use the money to employ somebody to help on a welfare side part-time. So quite a creative way of working. Lots of different routes to support children.
Great, thank you so much both. I think we've got a comment in the chat. So Jodie says, being a service child, sometimes the small things that don't cost a lot are the things I remember. For example, just someone checking in on me and asking how I was and if I received any letters meant a lot. So thanks for that comment. We've also got another question in the chat. So I work with a school that has 546 service children. We're in the middle of an SPTA. The SLT have hired me to improve attainment and transition. I plan to use a toolkit at our next training session, but how do I inspire those that have become the content with how things are?
That's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm very happy to work with Andrea outside this meeting and talk with her and explore with her what the challenges are within her own particular school setting, because she might not want to air them here, but very happy to engage and support her with that piece of work if that's of any help. But you know, we mustn't accept things as they are, it's always good to be reflective and always good to look at something from a different angle, particularly given the changes that have happened in the last 15 months within all our world. So I would say, time for reflection, but happy to help with that one.
And Andrea, I think if you look at those narrated PowerPoints on our website, there's those two topics, and you could pick little bits of those, for example, and show them, because there's some very detailed information. Attainment, we've got tables and information and all kinds of things that you could pick bits out of that, maybe, as well as the toolkit itself.
Great.
And the animations are designed to be really short ways of engaging with the agenda, and you might just find that people who are content with the way things are don't understand the full experience of service children's lives, and just understanding that better will make the difference. But it'd be lovely to hear how you get on when you're following a chat with Kim and others.
Also, the recordings of this afternoon are going to be available. You could show them Phil and his 4Ds to get them inspired, couldn't you?
Right, okay, so we've had just one more comment. So I think the most important thing, if there's only one child, is that they are still valued and supported, which is exactly what we've been speaking about. So my son went from a mostly military heavy school to the only one back in 2012, and he didn't get the support he was used to. So teachers weren't prepared for the deployments, and he never received any support. The toolkit was a massive improvement. So thank you for that, Tony. Okay, I'm just going to post the link to the evaluation form just to end the session. Please do only complete this now if you know that you won't be at the next session. Otherwise, the next session will be at 3:45 p.m. until 5:45 p.m. on the 23rd of June. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you all again for that. And we're going to delve a bit deeper into using the Thriving Lives Toolkit in different contexts, and we're going to hear from a lot of different special guests as well. So really excited about that as well. Any final words from the panelists today?
No, thank you for being a fantastic audience, and all the chat comments. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheerio.